Okay, welcome. Today I wanted to offer a few more reflections about girls' experience of boarding schools and how they differ from the male boys' perspective. And yeah, just following on from my discussion from last week, and also a preview of the podcast that will be going live in a couple of days. So enjoy. So yeah, yesterday on my podcast, episode 40. So amazing! I can't believe we've got to episode 40 already. That's is it 2.5 years? Yeah, I guess it's nearly 2.5 years I've been doing the podcast, and yeah, it's amazing that it keeps going. And I had a great episode with Macmillan and Sara Warner talking about the female perspective of boarding school. So Sarah and Karen are two counsellors who run workshops for therapists who work with female ex-boarders. And they noticed that there was a lot of information out there, a lot of books, a lot of teachings about the male perspective, about boys, what they went through, but very little for females. So that's why they set up their workshop. So we had a fascinating talk about some of the differences between a male's experiences and a female's experiences at boarding school. And yeah, it was really interesting because at one point we were talking and we all realized that we were talking about boys again. And that's often what they say happens, is that whenever we are talking about women and the female perspective of boarding school, it's often shown through the lens of the boys. When what they were trying to say, and Joyce Chavrin talks about this a bit in her book, Boarding School Syndrome, that the female experience is very different. And as I shared last week, I go into more depth if you want to watch that. This idea that there were certain things which are very, very different. One of the key things we spoke about yesterday, the experiences for girls at boarding school, is often around body. So there's this thing, bulimia, anorexia, and I was sharing some of my experiences that at my boarding school, I was at a co-educational school. There weren't as many girls, probably 200, 250 at the time. They're now split, half and half. But I have spoken to people from my boarding school, and they said that as a girl, they just stayed out of the dining room because it was a big place. All of the school sat and had a meal together. It was very noisy. And as Joyce Chavrin talks about, is eating needs to be something which is relaxed. It's something which is, a couple of people, not 800 people. And I've heard experiences of girls who've said they've not wanted to go into dining room because it's just felt, too full on. So this is something they were talking about yesterday, this idea of body image, and this idea of eating disorders, eating problems, digestive issues even as adults, and struggling still with food, not feeling relaxed around it. So that's kind of one of the things, and also self-harming. I know this is common in female school, for females in schools nowadays. I spoke to a parent a couple of years ago. I think it was in the forest school when I was working there. One of the parents went to the principal and said, look, my daughter's been self-harming. And the principal says, actually it's quite common. We've had 60 girls out of probably a couple of hundred who have been reported as self-harming. So what they're saying is that, self-harming also happens for girls in boarding school. The other thing, talking about clothes, the importance of wearing the right clothes for girls, and this thing of voice, speaking up, and being able to express themselves verbally, and that kind of makes that links into what I shared last week about how boys at boarding school were often beaten. That was their way of containing them, was through punishment. So my school, there was punishment. There was beating had finished. There wasn't beating at mine, but I worked at a boarding school later on when I was 18, 19, and they had beating. It wasn't in this country, it was in Australia. How they dealt with females is through shaming. So usually there would be a public shaming of this girl who'd maybe transgressed the rules. So it's kind of interesting there. They spoke a bit about jealousy, envy as well, that many women who've been at boarding school, when they grow up and become adults, there's still that sense of jealousy or kind of envy for other women. So that's part of the healing journey, and we spoke about that a bit, this idea, the importance of speaking. So just having the conversation between us yesterday, between me, a male ex-boarder, and the female, just hearing the conversation. What was their experience like? What was my experience like? For me as a co-educational school, I said, for me, girls, I just put them on pedestals. I couldn't even really talk to them. It was almost like this expression of my own heart projecting onto them, and I just felt so nervous about them, and really fantasized, but I couldn't have be comfortable around them, really. They didn't know what to say. And I think another thing I shared in the podcast is this idea, for me, the girls, they seem to have a lot more luxury, although we got that same luxury when I was 16, 17, but when I was younger, the girls had carpets, they had curtains, and we didn't have those as the boys, certainly in my boarding house. It was still very Spartan. So you'd go into the girls' boarding house and they'd have curtains and carpets and nice toasters, and it'd be like oh and different cubicle spaces, private spaces, which is what I saw. So we talked a bit about that. So the episode will go live tomorrow. No, it won't. It will go live on Friday, so in a couple of days. And some of the other topics, talk about the particular themes specific to women boarders, also about patriarchy, how that affects women differently, misogyny, and the workshops they do. So that will go live on Friday. You can watch it here on YouTube. It's also on iTunes, and it is also on Spotify. If you've not gone and liked or left a review for the podcast on iTunes or Spotify, please do. That just helps this message get spread out there. I'd like as many people to understand about the trauma that goes on in boarding schools, or has gone on, so we can change and heal. So I've also put in links to their workshop they're running in October, and links to their websites as well. So that will be on the podcast on Friday. So any question, please do let me know. And next week's podcast, I have a lady called Claudia Gold, who is an author. She's wrote quite a few best-selling books, and she's a pediatrician. She's worked with this idea of the still face, and it's again attachment, how we attach to our parents and breaking that attachment. So be linking it into trauma, and also linking that into boarding school as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're enjoying the lovely weather we've got in the UK at the moment, and yeah, many blessings.